Hey everybody, welcome back to Lettermen Row. I am Austin Ward. This is Lettermen Live, brought to you by Roosters. We are still not in a physical Roosters yet, but I promise you very soon we will be as the rules around Ohio phase back in so we can go back in public and eat and not have to get all the carry out and take out that we've been doing. Jeremy Birmingham from Lettermen Row joining me. And once again, we've got this 1-2 combo over here, Jay-Z, Justin Zwick, the quarterback, and the difference man down there, Anthony Schlegel. Took a week off, but he's back. Boys, good to have you all. We're getting close to maybe getting out of this thing, and I think that last week was good. I asked this question to you last week, Jay-Z, so I'm going to start right here. We talked to Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis in the middle of last week, and I had asked you this about, if a team would stay in a quarantine, if you would have been okay with that to get a whole season played. And the one thing that was missing from this, I thought, all along was we talked to the coaches. We had talked to Mark Pantoni. We talked to Mickey Marotti. We needed to hear from the players. And Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis, they're only two guys. They can't speak for the entire team, although they are two of the most respected leaders on this team. They both said they will do whatever it takes to play the season. And I think that sort of backs up, what you told me you thought might happen with this roster.
Yeah, so much goes in year round for these players. If you tell them whatever they got to do to play the season, they're going to do it. That's how they're programmed. They're in the weight room, whether it's in the film room, the coaches tell them what they expect, what they need them to do. You go do it. And so, I think if, double down, I think they would be willing to do whatever, sleep at the Woody Hayes if they had to, give them cots inside the indoor field. I bet they would sleep there and shower there and do everything they could to play that season. Slags, you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the culmination of everything that you've done your entire career, right? So at the end of the day, they just want to play ball, right? Now, again, they're facing the same trials and tribulations that everybody else is facing as a student, right? Like they don't know what's going on from the education standpoint, so they're dealing with that from home. They're still trying to be prepared because the most prepared team that goes into whenever they open everything up for everybody to train will be the teams that have the competitive advantage, right? So it's all predicated upon the culture and the accountability that the coaches have built into that program from an individual standpoint so that when they go back, like they are able to perform at a high level. The hardest thing for me, just looking at this holistically, you might want to, probably ask this question last time when I wasn't here, but the thing we're going to run into is, does everything open the same and who has competitive advantages or disadvantages predicated upon the states in which the Big Ten is, right? So we're opening Ohio at the end of this month. When are they going to open Illinois? When are they going to open up Indiana? If those are different, right, then how's the NCAA going to say, hey, we're going to open it up June 1st, but, potentially Illinois is not opening up till June 22nd. I'm just giving you random things. And what are the specifications that each state allows you to train in, right? Like I've been talking with a lot of the schools in the Big Ten because they have my product and my second patent, and how can we use outside training? Like at the end of the day, they just want to be able to train and their kids just want to be able to play. So you got to be adaptable and come up with solutions. That to me is going to be the next big question that these coaches have to face and administrators have to face are, what are the competitive disadvantages and when can we all open up as a conference to then start working with our student athletes, because they do need to train before they go into the season a little bit, right?
Yeah. So where do you fall on this, Schlegs? Because you've been involved in that process, and we've talked before about how long you think guys might need to get ready. But let's just use this hypothetical, and that Rutgers can't start training at the same time as Ohio State. Do you think the entire Big Ten should wait? Do you think – because it's not going to be possible for all of college football to be on the same schedule. It's just not. There's 130 teams in 41 states. All those rules are going to be different. But the Big Ten is a smaller sample size, but that's still going to be almost impossible, I think, to navigate. Do you think that that's absolutely necessary if that means that the start of the season has to be moved back because one or two teams may not have extra 3 or 4 weeks in the summer?
Well, it's predicated upon what are they doing during those 3 weeks that it gives them a competitive advantage, right? I mean, if it's like, hey, you can do ball, is it, hey, you can only, train with the kids, right? You can't meet, you can still do the virtual Zoom meetings or whatever that they already are doing. If it's a training aspect, that's probably not going to hold anybody back because they're going to say, well, because Ohio State can get together, they're still going to limit it, right? You can only have a certain amount of kids that are in the Woody at a time, just like they're doing at a regular gym. Like we're going over rules that we can do with our kids that want to play baseball over the summer, right? Like they got to wear masks when they're in the dugout, I mean, again, all these different parameters that they're putting on there are all the same things that they're going to have to adapt to. I don't see it holding it back based upon the training before everybody's allowed to be together at the same time. I don't see that necessarily as a stopping, a hard stop to where everybody can start. I think they're going to allow kids to go train, but how they do that, how they're adaptable is going to be very different, right? So it might be in New Jersey, hey, you can only train your kids outside. All right, guess what, Rutgers? You don't have an indoor, so they're going to have to train in the rain. They're going to have to, but you're still training, Ohio State has an indoor. Well, they can be in there. They're still going to limit it to the amount of quantity of people that can train at the same time, the amount of people that are, able to spot. Like, all right, we can't have spotters. We can work around that, right? So those are the things, because ultimately the things that give us a competitive advantage in the weight room, like the strength gains, everybody's going to be on the same even level, right? We all haven't had the things that we're used to. Everybody has that. So it's not an excuse, right? But being able to go practice football and running routes and doing those type of things would be a competitive advantage over another school. So those things might be limited to where here's the hard stop. And all this, in my honest opinion, is going to be predicated upon what the NFL does, right? It's going to go, NCAA is looking at what the NFL does, and it's going to filter down into what we do.
Yeah. Bern, we talked about this last Monday, that there was just this sense, at least that I had, and Jay-Z talked about it too, this growing optimism that there is going to be football. I think even from one week to the next, I would say I'm more confident now. Maybe that's just from listening to Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis describe all the things that, as those guys are two of the most mature college football players you're ever going to encounter, and they rattled through all the things from being willing to sacrifice with the self-quarantine, that they know they needed temperature checks, that they knew everything that needed to happen for them to play football. And obviously part of that is also coming through those Zoom meetings with the rest of the coaching staff. But I came away, if the players are on board with this, that and they know the risks and they're willing to sacrifice, and maybe some players wouldn't want to play, but if Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis are speaking for the other 83 guys, Ohio State seems to be fully on board and on the same page with football being played.
Yeah, I mean, I think most colleges across the country understand how important football is to their entire university. It's not even just about the kids who gave up, Josh Myers and Wyatt Davis, who were two potential first-round picks this past NFL draft, that gave up that millions of dollars to come back and play another year of football. If they don't get a chance to play, that is devastating to them. I mean, devastating. It may be different for a 18-year-old true freshman who hasn't been on campus yet. Maybe they want to take more time. Who knows? I mean, everyone's going to be different. But the fact is, these kids are in a position where I think they're smart enough to understand the big picture. That is a very, very healthy 19, 20, 21-year-old. They're at low risk. They know that there are precautions that need to be taken, and they're willing to do it. But from a university standpoint, the school has to understand, without football, how many things don't happen. And there's no doubt that they will push and look for ways to get football to happen, because football has to happen.
Yeah, the number there, I've thrown it out before on this show, that men's basketball is the only other sport that even can pay for itself, but it doesn't make money. The football program pays for the entirety of the athletic department. So if you're talking about 35 other sports that Gene Smith and Ohio State are trying to fund, that cannot happen without football. It just can't. And that's Ohio State with one of the biggest budgets and biggest athletic departments in the country. But, we're seeing Akron and Bowling Green just around Ohio cutting sports already without, I think they're anticipating the fact that maybe these non-conference games and the payouts are not going to happen. That's a big deal. So you're seeing that trickle down already, and no games have been canceled. I don't mean to paint that as doom and gloom, because Jay-Z, I was just going to see where you felt on the preparedness plan, if you're more confident this Monday than you were last Monday.
I am. I think, I said it last week, I think America wants something to move on to, and just, kind of put this in the rear view, even though it's going to still be around. But, we did what we were supposed to. We lowered the curve. Let's get out and live our lives. And if those numbers don't go crazy, let's just keep adding things and let's keep bringing more people back into what they're used to, their normal everyday life. It's not, I feel the same way. I'm very hopeful, and it's almost wrong to be hopeful nowadays. If you're hopeful that this is going to happen, well, you don't care about people, this or that, it's like, I'm hopeful, I'm still there. I was thinking, as you guys were talking, and Schlegel, you being on the coaching side when you were there for a few years, what if they just said, hey, we're not doing any training. 2 weeks before the first game is a date that everybody can kind of agree on. We're just coming to camp right then. No lead up to. You have 2 weeks of practice before you can start a game or before you play a game. Would that be something that has anybody heard of that talked about? Or Schlegel, do you think 2 weeks getting these guys coming from home, like back in the day, hey, camp starts on this date, show up in shape or be ready to rock? I mean, is that something that could happen here?
Well, Quinn, one of the assistant strength coaches, put out a thing. I mean, this was a while ago, but it was looking at the lockout of 2011 for the NFL, guys coming back, going to camp. And within the first month, I think they had 12 Achilles ruptures. What's going to happen is you can't simulate football, right? I mean, the number one thing I tell high school students is be in shape, right? Again, you can do agility work. You can do running, right? Run in an anaerobic state, right? You don't need to go run 3 miles. That's not the game that you play. You play an anaerobic, aerobic type sport, right? So that's how your conditioning should be. So you should come into camp in shape. The thing that you can't replicate is the cutting, the breaking down of speed of power, the being able to tackle. Those are the fundamentals that they have to be able to work on, and reducing the amount of time before you play. That is going to be a significant problem because now you're actually putting kids at risk because their bodies haven't been able to adapt to the stimulus of the physical contact, right? So again, if everybody's the same, everybody's working out on their own. And again, that's not even the same. Some people don't have access to the weights and things that other people have access to. But the fundamentals of our sport, to being able to strike, to being able to tackle, the ability to change direction on multiple surfaces while wearing pads, you can't replicate that without playing football, right? So those are the things that the student athlete has to have to protect them so that they can play at a high level. Because if not, you're going to see Achilles and knees and hamstrings, soft tissue injuries that are significantly greater than we did the year before. So that's where the camp, I think, is going to be in my honest opinion, 4 weeks to kind of 2 weeks to ooze them back in from a physiological standpoint, then probably a 2 to 4 week strength conditioning type program to a 3 week football program that would be camp. Because just like in the summer, you have spring ball, then you have Maymester, then you have the summer conditioning program, then you have camp. So being able to simulate a little bit of the off-season program in the summer to then be ready to go physically for camp and how your body is made up to handle the contact are the things that they're going to be looking at of when this projected, start of the season would happen. Because ultimately, we talk about the safety of the kids. I mean, I told my wife this the other day, my oldest son got the flu vaccine. Everybody else in my family got the flu vaccine. Papa Schlegel doesn't. The only time I get sick is when I'm run down, stressed, haven't slept, and not hydrating or bending my knees, right? I didn't get flu. My oldest son got flu A and B. Guess how many people in my family got sick? Nobody, right? Why? You're in temperature, you're in your room, you're kind of quarantined from the family. We're all sanitizing. We all shower, right? We bathe, all right? Eat good food. Nobody else got sick, right? So for them, they're going to do the temperature thing. If kid gets sick, they're going to be quarantined. They're going to have the protocols in place to be able to handle that. But the more pressing issue of the safety, in my honest opinion, is the safety of being able to play our sport at the high level that every fan at Ohio State expects our kids to be able to play the sport, right? So the safety of them being able to block and tackle is the thing that I'm most concerned about going back to playing football.
I remember very well. Jay-Z does too. I saw him laughing. It's that shin angle. If you can't get that right, then you're going to get sick. You got to have proper shin technique.
Well, you got to have the arch in the back too. I mean, I can't believe
hydrate, bend your knee.
He left that one out.
Right there, man. Right there.
Yeah, there it is. Oh, yeah.
No.
I don't know why Schlegel hasn't been put on the coronavirus task force yet, because he's got. We've been solving this thing on Lettermen Live, brought to you by Roosters, for months.
Right.
Doing it all wrong.
They don't want me on there.
Water and knee bends.
We'll make sure that there's football played here. There's no doubt about that. Guys, I was a little bit inspired to shift gears here by Berm's interview with Luke Fickell that aired on Lettermen Row on Monday morning. He asked him about the most painful Ohio State loss of his career. So I know what Berm's answer is here, but I'll let him go first. I just, to get it away, to talk about something other than the virus, but also maybe not something that everybody wants to pour through, but the worst memory, the worst loss, the most painful one that you can remember Ohio State being a part of, whether you were playing in the game, whether you were on the coaching staff. Berm, I know you've got your pick already.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I've been thinking about this since talking to Luke the other day, but I think it was the 98 Michigan State game that is the one that stands out the most to me, because that 98 Ohio State team, Justin, you would have been, a freshman in high school.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It was the best. It was the best team in the country by a wide margin the entire year. I mean, they were bludgeoning people week in, week out, similar to last year's team in a way, but the gap between the talent on the 98 Ohio State team compared to anyone else in the country, to go lose to Michigan State the way they did, like the weirdest stuff happening, like punts that were fair caught that bounced off a kid's head running down the field. Like that game to Michigan State was probably the worst. But then as Luke alluded to, the 96 Michigan game was up there as far as the worst. And then the 2015 Michigan State game from a media perspective. And then of course, growing up in Ohio and, being a fan of Ohio State my whole life, the 2015 Michigan State game, because I had to be on the sideline for that one. And in the driving rain and sideways.
That's all you were worried about, the weather.
But, well, yeah, because it was
the weather of that game.
Because the game was so ugly itself, and then you top that with the weather conditions in the late November. Blah in Ohio Stadium was pretty bad that night. But yeah, those are the three that really. Even the Clemson loss last year doesn't stand out to me as much, even though I thought Ohio State was a better team and should have won the game. But that Clemson team was really, really good. Those other games, those three games, Ohio State was significantly better than Michigan State both of those years, and Michigan in '96.
Schlegel, what game comes to mind for you?
What was Fix? Were it those?
96.
He said the 96 Michigan game, yeah.
Yeah,
that was Schlegel. I know you were at the time a 29-year-old in 1996, working in the military somewhere. But 96, Ohio
general
State,
in the Air Force.
Ohio State was up 9-0 at halftime. It had 3 possessions inside of the 5-yard line in the first half. Where were you? Were you coaching then?
Texas, man. I was in Texas. I was a high schooler.
So and then Sean Springs slipped and fell on an 86-yard touchdown that Ty Street scored in the third quarter, and it changed the entire game. And so they lost 13-9 because they couldn't score in the second half, because Pepe Pearson and apparently couldn't get the job done that day. But anyway, go on. Sorry, I just wanted to make sure you knew.
Well, mine would be pretty simple. The Texas game and the Penn State game in 05. I mean, we had Texas, right? But I mean, if you go look at that game was lost in the first quarter when we had 3 turnovers inside their 25-yard line and got 3 points, right? And when you play a great player like Vince Young, like, you have to capitalize on that. Just like we saw in the Clemson game, right? You have the opportunities, you have to capitalize, you have to put them away early because they were a great football team. Then you go back and look at the Penn State game where, and again, I speak defensively, we 3-and-outed them the entire second half, right? They ran the opening kickoff back in the second half. They got a field goal, and we got beat 17 to, 10 or 7, right? But, yeah, I mean, like that, they had 170 yards of total offense, and we got beat. And if you look at that game and then USC playing Texas in the final, like, I would love to have played USC. I'd love to have a rematch with Texas. Those 2 games for me, because we were in them, Jay-Z and I were my biggest losses. simply because of what it could have been from our team that year, right? And I think we really were clicking toward the end, and those kind of losses really helped fuel us toward the end of the season when we were really, really rolling, right? And that's kind of where the playoff is nice, because you could have that kind of early loss like we had in 14, right? But then we were peaking at the right time. Like, that's kind of what the college football playoff does now, is you can suffer a loss early, but you get redemption at the end. And that's when our team was actually probably the best, was at the end of the season.
No doubt about it. I think when you ask any guy who went through it, Austin, about what's the worst game in the history, it's going to be one of their worst games.
Yeah.
Like,
well, that's fine too. Yeah.
I remember the '98 and how great that team was. I mean, Coop just recruited like crazy, so he just had monsters everywhere. And so I remember that and thinking, man, that sucks. But as a freshman in high school, man, they lost. You lose games, it happens. But being a part of one and having it ripped out from you, I mean, that's so Texas to me jumped out right away. Of course, that was probably my last big game that I played in, and it's just heart-wrenching. We had a great team. The end of that '04 season, that Oklahoma State game, as Alamo Bowl, it was whatever. It was a fun bowl game, but we were pretty good by the end of that year. And so coming back into '05, you knew, all right, we kind of got our act together. We grew up a ton in that '04 season. And we got players everywhere. And so you thought you were going to make a good run. You knew you had Texas, the second game of the year, at night in the shoe. Like, it was just, man, that would have just put us on an awesome trajectory, I think. But, that was a tough one. I remember the Penn State. Troy made a bad read. I don't want to throw it on him because everybody's going to say, you're just mad. But no, he made a dumb read, and he threw the ball to the sideline, pick six. That's how they beat us, I think. I think that was the only touchdown that they had in the second half.
Well, they had one where I think they got a short field on a fumble or something, right? They had a pick six and they had a fumble or something. That was a short field that they punched in, and then they ran the opening kickoff back to where they kicked the field goal. Like, that was
that was it.
Entirety of that game in a whiteout, and you're just like, man, you can't do that.
To say to throw that back, it's crazy how football is, because you as you're saying that, I think back to '02 Penn State at home. Our offense probably had like 50 yards total offense, but our defense, Chris Gamble took one to the house. So it was kind of like just the flips. It was just a different game. It's just like, that's kind of how things went when we were there. We came. That
was the entire second half of the '02 season, though.
Yeah, you're right. Everything went perfect for those guys to win those games. It just kind of happened differently for us.
Justin, I wanted to ask you about the Iowa game in 2004. Because that was
you guys didn't know what you were getting into this week. I promise you.
Yeah, I need to get back here and pour me something after this.
I was living in Arizona at the time.
You were?
I always loved watching games. I don't remember a game in the early part of my life that was as bad for Ohio State as that game was. Yeah. What the hell happened? 33-7 final, but it was much worse than that.
Oh, it was much worse. And that was a late touchdown to a young Rory Nickel, I think, at the end of the fourth quarter, after we just started putting guys in because we were getting our butts kicked. That was a weird one, because we had just come off the overtime loss the week before to Northwestern out there. And, in overtime, that stunk. That whole game did. And we go into the pink locker rooms in Iowa, and they just owned us. I mean, I got dislocated my shoulder, and I think the second series of that game, it was minor, but it was my throwing shoulder, so that really hurt. But it was just nothing went right for us. I mean, I think one of our tackles had a sack in that game because Matt Roth just kind of threw him into the quarterback. It was a rough go. It was one of those games where it's like, what was that, when we went to Purdue and just got, crushed. Like, it was just kind of that game where it's like nothing went right. We couldn't figure anything out, and they were just hitting on all cylinders. But that was probably
it was such a rarity in the Jim Tressel area. It was such a rarity in the Jim Tressel era to look that out coached that I didn't really understand it. So I don't know why I've never asked you guys about it before, but that game was such an anomaly.
Sharing their feelings.
Yeah, I mean, that game was such an anomaly in the Tressel era, because every other loss was sort of like the LSU loss in the national championship game, that LSU team was just significantly better. Most of the other losses, even the USC loss, the 38-3 loss in 2008, that USC team was just better. And it was a freshman, Terrell Pryor, who shouldn't have been playing probably.
Mm-hmm.
But the Iowa game was just – that one stands out to me because I was like, what in the world is going on here?
Yeah, so do you remember any of that?
Yeah, I mean, I was born in Iowa, and I had all my family there. And I actually had like 15 tackles, and I mean, but we got smoked.
He
like,
had a good game, Slags.
Who cares if you have a good game when you get your face pounded in, you know? And then we got beat by Purdue on a last 2-minute drive, right? And here's the thing though, like you look at those losses, but then I saw the gains after the Purdue, right? Because then after Purdue, we were 3-3, and then we end up going 6-1 or 5-1 at the end. That kind of put us into this 2005 season, and 2004 was unique in the fact that we just had 14 guys drafted, and it was a true rebuilding year as far as leadership and identity of our team, and it kind of really moved us forward into their run of the end of 2005 and the 2006 and 2007 national championship, of what those guys were able to do. So I always look at those things as a positive. Again, I'm like you, Jay-Z. I'm always optimistic. I'm always hopeful. And so I view the losses as to the character building that it really did, because then going into 2005, all of us were like, man, we are not having another year like that, because you can't roll your helmet out there. It was more of a wake-up call for Ohio State football, that you just can't roll out the scarlet and gray and the silver bullet helmets and say, hey, we are who we are. No, you got to go work at it and perfect that craft. Even though we have the talent, you still got to go execute on Saturdays. And we weren't executing in those 3 losses, right? So
did that make winning the 2004 Michigan game your favorite win against Michigan? The way you guys went up to Ann Arbor and won that one?
No, we won. It was at home. 2004.
Yeah, it was at home. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
That was for the Rose Bowl. But you know what? Here's the thing about that game was it validated what we had, right? So then you looked at, well, how did we have those losses, right? And it was the preparation, it was the execution, right? Regardless of who you are, you could have all the talent in the world. If you don't execute, you're going to get beat by inferior opponents, and you're going to get beat by them handily, right? Because basically the same Iowa team showed up in Columbus, Ohio the following year, and we beat the brakes off of them, right? Drew Stanton couldn't do anything. Bobby had like 3 or 4 sacks that game. Like they couldn't do anything offensively. And so then you had a same defense. They gave up 33 the year before. They just gave up 7, right? And then at that Michigan game, you had Braylon Edwards, and you had them going to the Rose Bowl and winning the Big Ten that year. And we beat them 37-21. I mean, like, how does that stuff happen? Well, it happens because we were prepared, we executed, we handled adversity. And these are the things that we're capable of doing when we go execute. But guess what? Big time college football, you have to execute on a weekly basis, right? So it just kind of validates the things that the coaches are always telling you. And again, as a 18 to 27-year-old, I'm just kidding. I was 20.
You're like the first Australian rules punter that ever ended up at Ohio State.
Yeah, no doubt. But those are the lessons learned, right? At the end of the day, it's the fundamentals and the execution that win the game, that win the big games, right? When everything is equal. So it just showed that we could do it, right? And so that was a big time. My biggest win at Ohio State, obviously, for me, is 2005. Up there, right? And that was kind of one of the things where it was back and forth every year. Who was at home had the advantage. Well, not so fast, my friends. We won that game. We won it. It was close, right? We ended up winning it at the end of the game. But that kind of turned the tides for the run that we were on now, right? Where the only loss that we had was in 11, of which we were in that game, and that was in itself an anomaly of a year, right? So, yeah, anyways, go Buck.
I'm glad you guys answered the question that way with your own experience, because when you think about the one that I would pick, and I know Berm gives me a hard time all about that I don't have the long institutional memory that you 3 do, or that he does growing up in it. But I think about the one that I believe I'll be talking about forever, which is the Clemson game in the Fiesta Bowl this year, and how that impacts Chris Olave going into 2020. Because obviously that's a missed opportunity, one that I feel like was snatched away. The what-if scenarios, we don't have to play all those out again. We did that throughout January and February. But I feel like that one is going to take the place of the 15 game that I covered, forever being, reminded of the overturned fumble and the Sean Wade ejection and J.K. Dobbins injury and so on and so forth. That one, that I think is harder to wrap your mind around when it wasn't a loss or a bad play or bad play calling, because Ohio State deserved to win that game. But Chris Olave is going to have that memory. We've talked about, to Brian Hartline and Mickey Marotti about the way he's attacked the offseason. He's not going to be worried about, Jordan Fuller or Jeff Okudah or Sean Wade. He's going to be thinking about that play for him and how he could have executed better. And Justin Fields will have the same mentality that sometimes you have to go through one of these losses, as you guys both did, to come out of the other side. And I'm curious to see how this plays out for Chris Olave, how this works for Ohio State once they get back to business, because, you've said this a bunch of times, Schlegs, if you can't handle the adversity, you're not ever going to get that reward on the other side.
Yeah, Tom Ryan said it beautifully. I mean, there's nothing worse than wasted suffering. And when you're on a team, right, and you make a mistake, right, open field tackle, missed, right, misread, right, Justin, like, you take that to heart and you do it because you don't want to let your teammate down. You feel like you let your teammate down. So then coming back in this 2020 season, it's not necessarily the chip on his shoulder that I'm going to prove people. It's the fact that, as a student athlete, as an athlete on a team, we do it for our teammate. The good ones do, right? They go out and they work on their craft for their teammate, because when called upon, you are responding. You want to go make the play when coach puts you in that position, right? And you want to have the trust of your coach by working on those things that they can call a defense or call a play because they know that you're going to execute, right? And so he's going to take that suffering that he felt, that trial and tribulation, and just be better for it. But also, not only he's going to be better, but he's going to be pushing his own room because they're watching how he's working, right, to make them better. And that's why, the beauty of me playing with 2 first-round draft pick linebackers and me even coming to Ohio State, I wanted to go where the best of the best were, because ultimately I wanted competition and I wanted them to make me better. You know what I'm saying? I was a good linebacker. I was a good college football linebacker, right? That played with great players on a great defense, of which they made me better. And I tell this to people all the time. I would much rather be a good player on the number 1 defense in the country than a great player playing somewhere else, period, right? But that's just my makeup. And we all need to go through these things in business, when we all become adults outside of college football. Like, we want those things because we're the sum of our life's experiences, and we know what that feels like. So in business, when you suffer a loss, right, and that could potentially be a sale, it could be potentially not working out a deal for somebody to acquire your company, you're going to take that, fuel you, adapt and adjust, and you're going to keep attacking and dominating. But we learn those lessons that we have from college football, right? Like, that's the beauty of high-level athletics, right? And that's what separates, the good from the great, right? How do we handle that adversity, that suffering, for down the road? It's just going to enhance us so we can always add value.
Yeah, I think that's with any team sport. I think most athletes probably remember the bad games better or more than they remember like the really good games, because that's what drives them and that's what eats at them, in that off season, or when they're doing something to better themselves or better their team. So I think that's just one of those things that you learn growing up in team sports. And I think that's why it's so important for kids to play multiple different team sports, because you just get those lessons and you learn how to, all right, we're not going to win them all. Let's take what we did here and learn from it, so next season or next game we can do it better and have a different outcome.
Hey, Jay-Z, if you want, before we wrap up here, you can ask Berm about his high school state championship game.
It's all good. How did it go? I mean, was there one?
We just want to balance the scales here, right, Berm?
I mean, if you're talking,
tell me about the worst things that happened in your life as a college football player.
If you're talking about painful losses, you will never experience one more painful than my senior year of high school in our state championship game. But never. I mean, we were up 5-3 in the bottom of the 7th inning. I'm sorry, 7-3 in the bottom of the 7th inning, and gave up 5 runs on 4 walks, 4 errors, and 1 hit, and lost 8-7.
That's awful.
Now, were you pitching?
No, because I pitched the first 5 innings, and had the state had its 10 innings and 72-hour rule, and I had to pitch. We went into 10 innings in the state semi, and I had to pitch 5 through 10 in that game, and then went and started this championship game and left with a 7-3 lead. I mean, it was just, I can't, it was so brutal, like so brutal. And the fact is, because sports is such a bitch that it comes down to these things, right? Like we had 4 errors, 4 walks, but if it wasn't a 3-2 pitch on the last play of the game, we still would have won. Like it was 7-6, and it was a 3-2 pitch, and the bases were loaded, so everyone was running, and it was a ground ball to our shortstop. The turn was there. It was an easy 6-4-3, and the runner from first base took out the second baseman, so his throw went off.
I didn't really want you to tell the whole story again.
I'm enjoying this.
It's brutal. It's one of, I mean, we were the 16th ranked team in the country. We were playing against Hamilton, who was number 2 in the country. And I mean, we were 29-1. They were 30-0. It was an incredible game and heartbreak. I mean, absolutely heartbreaking.
On our road trip, I could tell you that story word for word. I've heard it so many times when we're just sitting in the car.
It's brutal. It's brutal.
So I didn't necessarily want to just fill out the rest of Lettermen Live, brought to you by Roosters, with Berm's high school exploits. But
23 years ago now. 23 years ago.
Man,
never let it go.
All 3 that you guys have made it, that those losses stick with you. Mine will be Saturday's 2-man scramble, where I lost 3 straight bogeys, 16, 17, and 18, to lose by 1. That's the most. It happened on Saturday. It's not recency bias. It's the most painful loss I think I've ever suffered. I'll not get over it, but I'll be back out Saturday to make up for it. And we'll be back next week with Roosters. Stay tuned. We're hoping to have some plans to maybe get back out into the wild, get these guys some mac and cheese bites as things get going. It's not 100% certain, but Roosters is putting together their plan to expand and get people back on the patios, get back social distancing back inside. So that we can go all out and eat, and we can have Lettermen Live there and not get rid of this Zoom and get a little bit more interaction in person, which we've all been looking forward to so much. Appreciate Jeremy Birmingham, Justin Zwick, Anthony Schlegel, The Difference, Attack and Dominate.
Hey, next week you asked me about all these people talking about our linebackers. You put that on there and you tell people get ready, because I'm gonna melt some faces off.
It's coming. I didn't want to use it all up today. I want you to bring that.
You did that. Save that for the live show, because I will melt your old CrossFit and faces off.
Linebackers coming hot, so stay tuned for that. More plans as we get try and get back to normal here at Lettermen Row and Lettermen Live, brought to you by Roosters. Thanks for hanging out, guys. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching. Subscribe below to get the latest videos from Lettermen Row.
We got Lettermen Live, we've got the practice report, we got rapid reaction. Hey, and you know we got Buckeye IQ with Zach Bourne.
For sure. We got recruiting breakdowns with Berm. We got whatever you need. Ohio State football and Ohio State athletics, we've got you covered here at Lettermen Row.